Hi guys, I'm Francine, and in this video I want to share with you my redrawing of my OC or original character, Neria. But first, I want to briefly talk about why redrawing one of your earlier illustrations, whether it's a portrait or a landscape or what have you, is a great practice and a great way to visualize how far you've come as an artist. Oftentimes, when we're working on a piece or even multiple pieces at a time, it's really hard to appreciate your progress, your growth, and your skills. We're so focused on what we're working on now that it can be really easy to develop a sort of tunnel vision around your current piece or your most recent illustrations. I don't know about you, but I find that when I'm in the thick of my work, I find myself questioning my growth as an artist. I know that progress isn't a straight line. If you take a look at your last 5 pictures, you may not see sequential improvement. Your 3rd picture may be better than your 4th or even your 5th picture. And if you're like me, that can kind of bum you out. But here's the thing. I'm pretty sure if you took those 5 most recent illustrations and compared them to 5 illustrations you did a year ago or even 2 years ago, you'll see some major improvements. Which is why I've made it a habit, or tradition if you will, to redraw my OC Neria every year. This gives me a chance to see how far I've come, how much I've learned, how much my style has shifted, and it gives me a bit of a confidence boost overall. Here's my OC Neria back in maybe May of 2020. Pretty much the beginning of COVID and lockdown for us here in the US. My friends and I had started playing D&D online, and I decided I wanted to create a character token for my character profile. I don't really want to knock my efforts here because we all have to start somewhere, but as you can see, she's really something. I did this in Procreate, as I do all my illustrations, but I didn't know how to use the features, I don't think. I think I used black for the shading, which is why her skin or everything about her looks a bit ashen. At the time I didn't know you really should not use black for shading. I didn't use any references, which is why she looks the way she does. She's got eyes of sorts, a nose, a mouth, braids that don't look anything like braids, and earrings that aren't really in her ear, they're just sort of resting on the helix of her ear. And don't even get me started on the rest of her ear. Besides that, I knew that I wanted to give her a bluish green tunic with pointed shoulders and a blue long sleeve undershirt. Now, 2020 Neria took me 8 hours. And at the time, it felt like forever. But now if I were to copy this exact same style again, I'm sure it would take me less than an hour, maybe even less than half an hour. And this is also about the time I decided to put all my efforts into drawing full time based on this. But I don't hate it. I was able to put onto paper, so to speak, what I wanted out of my character. And I was so proud of her. I texted all my friends and shared this illustration with them, and they were so supportive. I love them so much. So yeah, this is basically the very beginning of my art journey. Now let's jump to 2021 Neria. Okay, big difference in 1 year. This version took me about 15 hours to complete, and at this point I felt much better about all the things I mentioned in regards to 2020 Neria. Her earrings are properly attached to her ear, the braids look like braids, her clothes are much improved, the shading and lighting are better overall, she's got hands in this one and they look pretty good. So at this point in my art journey, I knew what sort of style I was aiming for. I wanted a graphic novel sort of vibe. I wasn't aiming for realism, but I didn't want it to look too cartoony, which 2020 Neria definitely did. I knew what feeling or energy I wanted the character to evoke. She's kind of giving off this subtle, cocky, come at me bro sort of vibe, which is sort of reflected in her facial expression, her floating hair. And I actually really love the tension in her hands as she's kind of focusing and creating her magic. Magic missiles, by the way, which is one of my go-to attacks in D&D. The biggest difference here is that I used references. I found several photos of people who had a light source kind of in front of their chest like Neria, and I studied them to see where the light shone onto their faces, and I tried to replicate that in this piece. I also definitely use references for her hands. Drawing hands is hard, so it helps to look at photos that have the hands in similar positions. By the way, you can also create your own reference shots. Just set up your camera or your phone on a tripod or lean it up against something, set up your timer, and pose away. I always use references now when I'm drawing anything. Now, while I am proud of this piece, there are still several things that I'm seeing right now that I didn't necessarily see back in 2021 that need a lot of work. I overblended the shadows and lighting on her face, and it gives it a really computerized sort of look, especially her lips. It just doesn't vibe with the rest of her. And the proportions. Her head is much too big for her body. So let's move on to 2022 Neria. I feel pretty mixed about 2022 Neria. In a lot of ways, I prefer 2021 Neria. This version is just too stiff. It's somehow lost the energy of the previous version. Her arms are too symmetrical, and she's lost that magical pull, that tension in her hands. And the way her hair is parting as it floats just doesn't quite make sense. However, the shading and lighting and blending is better overall. And at this point, I was experimenting with adding different colors to the lighting. Like in addition to the blue lighting, there's a bit of purple tinge in her face and her hair. And I was also playing around with line weight. You'll see that the outermost lines are thicker than the lines within the shape of the character. I also started to pay closer attention to what a person's eyes, nose, and mouth actually look like, and the ways in which tiny things can completely alter a facial expression. Despite preferring 2021 Neria, this version is actually closer to what I was looking for stylistically. And this version took me 30 hours. 2022 Neria took me 30 hours to complete. Now let's get to my most recent version of Neria. For this one, I did the sketch at the end of 2023, but I didn't get around to finishing her until January of 2024, so we're just gonna call her 2024 Neria. This one is much different from all her previous iterations. You can see more of her body in this one, more of her clothes, her accessories, and for kicks, I added a background. My style has evolved quite a bit. Still not realism, but I've begun adding a bit of visible paint strokes for my lighting and shading. Nothing too painterly because I'm not aiming for that either stylistically, but just enough to give the image a bit more texture and honestly to make it not so perfect or orderly looking. And still using reference images for pretty much everything in this illustration, and it's paid off. Look at her eyes. I love her eyes. But just like all my previous illustrations, there's still lots that can be improved. Just to name a few, the tip of her nose is too small to really be proportional to the rest of her nose. Her overall proportions still aren't quite right. The hand holding the magic missiles should be slightly bigger, although proportions overall I think are much improved from her previous versions. And I'm still using different line weights, but I could have made them more pronounced, I think. But you can tell I've just become more confident as an artist because I've actually added more elements in this illustration. The background is more complex. Previously I've just drawn like a night sky with stars. And there are more aspects to her character. As I mentioned, you can see more of her body, more of her clothes. I added accessories, and her pose is different. And I've been doing a sort of out of the border thing with my recent illustrations that I carried over to this illustration. And I managed to regain that cocky, come at me bro vibe that's been missing since 2021. Like I said, there are things I would have liked to do differently or work on a bit more, but at 29 hours, I maxed out and called it done. I can't believe that over the course of 4 years, I've been able to go from this to this. Yes, there's a big difference in the time it took for each piece, Like I said, the 2020 version took me 8 hours and this version took me 29 hours. But there's no way that 2020 me could have spent the time or even imagined spending almost 30 hours on one piece. I didn't even have the knowledge or skills to comprehend doing something like that. But look how far I've come. I've learned so much and I'm so proud of myself, and I can't wait to see what Neria will look like next year. Now, before I go, here's a quick tip if you want to feel really good about your progress as an artist. Take all your images, or however many images you want to compare, in my case 4, and combine them in a layout. I believe I use the layout app and I am pretty sure it's free. If you do this, instead of flipping back and forth between each individual image and comparing it that way, you can have all your images in one layout and look at them all and really see the difference. Now, depending on the size of the image, the entire illustration might not fit in each layout grid. But say you want to focus on comparing the different ways you drew faces. Just add the images into the layout, zoom in on each one of their faces, and voila. Now go redraw some of your old art and marvel at how much you've improved. Bye!